So in this video we're looking at tanks. We're looking at the period of 1925 to 1935 because those would have been the period of tanks that would have been used for War Plan Red. This period witnessed significant advancements in military technology, and the evolution of tank design was no exception. In the United Kingdom, this era was marked by the development of armoured warfare doctrine and the introduction of tanks that would lay the groundwork for future innovations. And in this video, we're going to explore those tanks that the British had between 1925 and 35, highlighting some of the key models and strategic contexts that shaped their design. First up, we're going to look at the Vickers Medium Mark I. In the mid-1920s, the Vickers Medium Mark I emerged as one of the first British tanks of the interwar period. Armed with a 3-pounder or 47mm gun and multiple machine guns, this medium tank represented a significant step forward from those tanks that had been used during World War I. The Vickers Medium Mark I played a crucial role in developing the British Army's understanding of armoured warfare and served as a platform for further innovations. Next up is the Vickers Medium Mark II. Following on from the design of the Medium Mark I, the Vickers Medium Mark II was introduced, and it featured improved mobility and firepower. This tank still retained the 3-pounder gun, but incorporated lessons learnt from the earlier model and showcased advancements in tank design during the mid-1920s. Next up is the Vickers Medium Mark III. Now the Vickers Medium Mark III, with its distinctive knock-knee appearance due to the locations of sponsons, was another development in the British tank design during this period. It again featured that 3-pounder gun and a machine gun, demonstrating incremental improvements in armour and mobility over its predecessors. Following on from that was the Vickers Medium Mark IV, and it continuing the trend of innovation by the Vickers Medium Mark IV, and was introduced in the 1930s. This tank featured a fully rotating turret armed with a 2-pounder 40mm gun, and which was a significant improvement in firepower. The Medium Mark IV showcased the British commitment to staying at the forefront of tank technology during the interwar years. Next, we're going to look at the A9 cruiser tank. By the mid-1930s, the British Army had introduced the A9 cruiser tank. This was a fast and mobile tank featuring a 2-pounder gun and was designed for exploration and reconnaissance roles. The A9 cruiser tank reflected the growing emphasis on cruiser tanks in the British armoured doctrine, recognising the need for fast manoeuvrable tanks in addition to being heavily armoured infantry support tanks. The interwar years between 1925 and 1935 were quite a dynamic period for British tank development. From the early experiments with the Vickers Medium Mark series to the introduction of cruiser tanks like the A9, the British military was actively refining its armoured forces. These tanks presented a transition from the experimental designs of the intermediate post-World War I area to the more specialised and strategically focused tanks that would eventually play a crucial role in conflicts of the following decades. The lessons learnt during this period laid the foundation for the British armoured forces that would become a fairly formidable component of the Allied efforts during World War II. So now we're going to take a look at the American tanks from the same period, 1925 to 1935, and look at some of the examples of what they came up with and what, as a wargamer, will be available to you. This period between 25 to 35 marked a crucial era in development of military technology, particularly in armoured warfare. Now, in the United States, this decade witnessed the evolution of tank design and as well military doctrine, and which would set the stage for future armoured forces that would be become vital during World War II. So we're going to look at tanks between 1925 and 1935 and sort of look at some of the key developments and milestones in this period. And first off, we're going to look at the M1917 light tank, or the M1917 light tank, also known as the 6-ton tank. It was one of the earliest tanks employed by the United States during World War I. However, its influence extended well into the interwar years. It featured a 37mm gun and had a crew of 2. Whilst it didn't see extensive combat during its initial deployment, the M1917 would lay the groundwork for American tank development in future years to come. The next tank is the M1920 light tank. So following World War I, the US Army continued to explore tank design and made pretty big improvements. The M1920 light tank represented quite a big step forward, featuring enhanced mobility and firepower compared to its predecessors. This tank was armed with a 37mm M1916 gun and a 30 caliber machine guns, and it played a big role in refining American armored doctrine during this period of history. They brought out the M1921 medium tank. During the 1920s, the American Army sought to develop a medium tank to complement its light tank forces, and the M1921 medium tank, also known as the T1 combat car, was born. And it featured a 37mm gun and was designed to provide increased firepower and protection compared to its earlier models. Though not widely produced, the M1921 did contribute valuable lessons to the ongoing development of armoured warfare tactics. Next up was the M1928/M1931 combat car. In an ongoing sort of effort to refine tank designs, the Americans came out with the M1928 and the M1931 combat cars, and they emerged with improvements on previous models. They were again armed with 37mm M1 cannon and 30 caliber machine guns. Now these vehicles served primarily as reconnaissance and infantry support roles. Their developments signalled a shift towards more specialised roles for tanks within the US military. The next tank we're going to look at is the M1931 Christie tank. Now the M1931 Christie tank was based on designs of engineer J. Walter Christie, who introduced innovative features such as a convertible suspension system for enhanced speed on roads. Whilst this tank did not see widespread adoption within the US military, its design elements influenced majorly some of the more future tank developments that would come later, both domestically and internationally. The decade spanning 1925 to 35 was quite a critical period in the evolution of tanks for the American military, from the early M1917 light tank to its more experimental designs of mid-1930s. This era laid the groundwork for development of more advanced armoured vehicles in the years leading up to World War II. Those lessons learnt from these early tank designs would play a huge role in the development of things like the Sherman and shaping American armoured warfare. As the world approached another global conflict, the US military would continue to build upon these foundations, leading to the development of some of the most formidable tanks that would play a huge crucial role within World War II and in the battles of the coming decades, especially once those tanks came up against German armour. If you were to say which two countries were producing some of the best tanks of the period during World War II, it was Germany and probably in America. Both of them developed quite significant armoured forces and strategies that would go on to help them during World War II. But for the War Plan Red, you're not going to, as a war gamer, you're not going to get Shermans. You're not going to get the M3 Garand. You can get some of the tanks we talked about just recently, and yet, if there had been a conflict between the UK and America, and a lot of that would have taken place in Asia, that tank development might have sped up. So you may have got the M3 Grant within a couple of years of a conflict, and the Shermans. Those would have probably come on and probably come on a bit quicker. Because we need to remember that whilst America was heavily involved in World War II, they didn't come in 1939. They came in later, sort of 1940, 1941. So there wasn't a rush for America to speed up tank development. But with a conflict with UK in say 35, that tank development would have probably got sped up, and those tanks would have come out a bit earlier. And some of the later tanks that came out, sort of at the end of World War II, in the early years after World War II, may have come out earlier as well. Anyway, that's a quick video looking at some of the tanks that would have been available to both forces during this period, and give you sort of an idea what tanks you would be able to take as a war game in any of your armies to play out a what if scenario. And that's all for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, where we'll be looking at the next couple of videos. We'll be looking at armored cars and artillery, and I probably do a video on small arms, because obviously small arms will be different as well. Some of the weapons that were available during World War II weren't available quite yet. Things like the Stain gun for the British, the grease gun for the Americans wouldn't have been around, because the grease gun came about because the Thompson was too expensive to mass produce, and they needed a cheaper SMG. Likewise, for the Brits, the Sten was a cheap, easily to manufacture machine gun. The Thompson was quite expensive, and they were buying that from America. So in War Plan Red, they would have had the Brits would have had Thompsons, but once that conflict started, that trade of being able to buy Thompsons from the Americans would have pretty much halted. So the only other gun they had available at the time was the Lanchester. Now they would have probably sped up the development and got the Sten a lot quicker and a lot earlier, because they were the necessity to actually do that. But we'll talk about that in the next video. Anyway, that's all for this week, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.